when I first met Brad, he was playing tuba exclusively. And I believe that someone lent him a euphonium. I'm not remembering his name, but I remember the guy. Actually, he used to live in an old fire station down on the southwest side. He's an artist, painter. And I believe he lent him a euphonium, and Brad, got comfortable with it. And because the euphonium was higher in pitch, his lines were more easily discernible. The problem with the tuba was that he could never get it amplified in such a way that you could really hear his lines, his bop lines, which he was well known for, being pretty much the only bebop tuba player. And but it was those lines. It was a lot. It could be heard more clearly on the euphonium. It was easier to mic that. So I think that had a lot to do with his switch from one instrument to the other.
Well, really, I think part of it was physical, because Brad played the tuba standing up, and sometimes he would have a rope strap, and that thing must have weighed 30 pounds. So after a period of years, I think it became physically draining, and so he was looking for the smaller horn, and I think that was a big part of the move to euphonium. And then over time, he never totally gave up the tuba, always practiced it, but over time, just more gigs on euphonium, and most gigs exclusively euphonium as years went by.
He liked playing both. I remember there was a passage in one of Scott Gwinnell's charts, who Brad played with for many years, where he was required to switch. He was doubling. He was required to switch from euphonium to tuba, and I think he got a big kick out of doing that.
Well, I think he listened to everything. Brad was kind of a musical sponge, and picked up on a lot of different things. And but I think really primary influence would be Charlie Parker and John Coltrane, which was part of the thing that made him unique, to be a low brass player and have those artists as your inspiration. I think is pretty unusual.
Yeah, he was listening to bop. One thing that I found interesting about his taste were that you would naturally think that he would gravitate towards trombone players, and because that was the function that he often sort of played in a jazz band. You'd have trumpet, saxophone, and trombone, but he wasn't that. I mean, he liked the great trombone players, and he listened to I think Curtis Fuller in particular, but he wasn't that. He didn't focus his listening on trombone players, which I sort of thought he would do, but he didn't. He listened to saxophone players and trumpet players. And so I remember the last time I saw Brad, this was that Friday that he went into the hospital for the last time. He was listening to Miles Davis' "Fee to Kilimanjaro." He was listening to that era of Miles, which was the lead up to one of the lead up records to Bitches Brew. So, so that I think that's where his tastes were going at the time that he died. But I remember, hearing he was into the Cookie Monster vocalists, it's the rock Cookie Monster style of singing, and so
like death metal type thing.
Yeah, and I was surprised that he was
Slipknot,
yeah, something about "you're overrated" or something like that. But another thing that I was wondering about this. Did he listen to classical music a lot?
Definitely,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
big time. I mean, one of his tunes, Tchaikovsky in Brooklyn, that was
Right.
a direct reference to classical. But all through, I mean, Bartok, Bach, all of that stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
That's why I say very broad interests in terms of his listening habits.
He was able to, first of all, he became a fluent improviser in a variety of different styles of jazz. So he could play, he had vocabulary that fit bop, fit hard bop. He could play swing, he could play Dixieland, and that, I think, that's one of the marks of a fully matured jazz musician, is that you have vocabulary that you can deal with a broad range of repertoire. So he had that. But perhaps even more importantly, he had his own original music. And he was, I know Doug has told me this, as time went on, he became more and more into composing, as well as, practicing his instruments and getting better on his instruments. But he was really into composing, and he had, as you can hear from the music that we're playing today, he had a very distinctive personal style, and rooted in bop, but a lot of hard bop in there, and then a lot of things that were just sort of him. If you listen to some of those lines, it almost sounds like Hindemith or something like that, like 12-tone composition. And so he had that, and equally importantly, he had the ability to organize a band, to choose musicians and organize a band that could play his music. And in rehearsals, he was able to, explain to them what he was looking for, and they were able to do it. So he had this original music, and he was able to create an instrument, kind of like Duke Ellington. He was able to create an instrument that could realize his vision. So that, those are all that, I think that's success in jazz at the highest level, in terms of artistic success. Being able to do all of those different things, that's kind of the definition of having made it.
Yeah.
Well, the famous story, he started off as a trumpet player when he was maybe 12 years old. And shortly after he began playing trumpet, he had braces put on his teeth. Could no longer play trumpet. And so at that time they call it junior high school. I guess now they call it middle school. They switched him to tuba, the band director, and basically gave Brad a basic tuba instruction book of exercises and put him in a practice room to kind of fend for himself. And at first, Brad did not like it very much, but over time, as he, became more committed to getting good on the instrument, he grew to really love it, And then in high school, he made some great leaps forward in terms of his ability, and ended up earning a classical scholarship to Oakland University, where the classical didn't last very long and the jazz lasted a very long time in terms of Brad's musical career, At Oakland, he went there on a classical scholarship, as I mentioned, and then kind of on a lark, he knew there was a jazz band, and he was starting to listen to jazz.
Mm-hmm.
So he went down to jazz band rehearsal, and pretty soon the classical was not of interest, and he was focused on the jazz.